I've been thinking, is free will magic? Like any good philosophical discourse, let's start by defining our terms. And don't worry if you're not philosophically literate. If Socrates has taught us anything, it's that you probably already know all of this. Okay, so Google search defines magic as the power of apparently influencing some course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. It then defines supernatural as of a manifestation or event attributed to forces that are beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature. So then magic is when some course of events seem to be influenced by any force that's beyond the scientific understanding. Except that would mean that literally anything we don't understand is magic. And that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's not as though a magician is doing actual magic up until the point that we understand a sleight of hand. I mean, we might say that we used to consider it magic, and now we understand it, and now we see that it's not actually magic. So then what was that last part of the definition of supernatural? It said something about being beyond the laws of nature. Alright, so maybe we could just say that magic is anything other than the laws of nature. I mean, we don't have to say that we know what the laws of nature are, just affirm that there are some laws out there existing, waiting for us to discover them, and magic is anything other than those. Let's work with that and see where that gets us. It's also going to be important to remember that a scientific theory is measured in part by its predictive power. It's right there in the scientific method. I mean, it can't just explain the past, but it has to make accurate predictions about the future, so that we can test it. Such a view lends itself to something called causal determinism. Causal determinism, hereafter simply determinism, is the thesis that the course of the future is entirely determined by the conjunction of the past and the laws of nature. So that given the way that things have gone in the past, and that the laws of nature cannot be interrupted, then there's only one possible universe. Such a universe would of course include you and I, and here's the conflict. I mean, this means that what we typically consider to be free choices are actually just chain reactions. Inevitabilities, given that we are brains are physical things, and all physical things will always obey the laws of nature. Now it gets even worse. There's another pillar required for the usual way that we think about the scientific method. This is something called an isolated system. An isolated system can exchange neither energy nor matter with an outside system. This is like isolating a bacteria in a glass before you study it under a microscope. Now imagine if you had a meddling coworker who kept poking his pen into the glass. Not only would this be ruthlessly annoying, but might also render studying the bacteria totally pointless. I mean, you'd have to account for both the properties of the pen, which you don't know yet, and the properties of the bacteria that you also don't know yet. So it's in this way that the scientific community is not exactly eager to imagine that our universe is not in and of itself an isolated system. I mean, this might mean that the whole scientific endeavor is little more than a waste of energy that's going to be exchanged with an outside system anyways. Dude, I did waste of energy. Outside system. So what does any of this have to do with free will? Well, I mean, maybe everything. It certainly does look like I may not have free will if what's really going on is just a series of chain reactions. Why am I responsible for my actions? I mean, isn't this the reason that people can plead insanity? Because they're showing that it wasn't even available for them to do other than what they did? I mean, if this is true, I'm no more in control of my next action than I am that the sun will rise tomorrow. So maybe we're just thinking about free will wrong. I mean, I'll be honest, I've only been talking about libertarian free will so far because that's usually considered the common sense view. Libertarian free will is a type of incompatibilism. Incompatibilism is a philosophical thesis about the relevance of determinism to free will, that the truth of determinism rules out the existence of free will, so that no matter how much you love pie and really want to eat pie, it is available for you to withhold from doing so. The same would be true for a murderer. No matter how much his desires compel him, it was available to him at some point prior to the act of murder to refrain from killing the person. This is why we can rationally hold him responsible for his actions. I mean, what else are we going to say? You should be responsible for anything that your body does? But then what if you're being coerced? Or worse, what if somebody's stimulating your nervous system with electrodes and causes your finger to pull the trigger of a gun that kills somebody? Should you really be held responsible for that action? Okay, so this brings us to our next point. This is a view called compatibilism. Compatibilism affirms that when you think of free will correctly, it's actually compatible with determinism. And they give us some helpful tools for getting around objections like the one I just said. Compatibilists can give their own account of the ability to do otherwise. For them to say that Allison could have done otherwise is simply to say that Allison would have done otherwise had she willed or chosen to do so. Of course, if determinism is true, then the only way that Allison could have willed or chosen to do otherwise would be if either the past or the laws of nature were different than they actually are. Compatibilism attempts to refocus us on what we're really concerned about. When we think of determinism and free will, we're not really worried about consequences or responsibility, but rather of being manipulated in some way that causes us to do other than we'd have liked to do. Therefore, compatibilism would say that so long as you're doing what you want, not being physically withheld or manipulated in some way, then whatever action arises from such desires is rightly considered yours. You're free to do whatsoever you want. And since desires are themselves reducible to neuronal activity in the brain, which obey the laws of nature, if we had enough information, we could predict with 100% certainty what your next thought, desire, action, motivation would be. Remember that predictive power is critical to advance a scientific model. So thinking of free will this way puts it squarely within the grasp of scientific understanding and the laws of nature. Okay, so maybe we're happy with this. We get to keep our free will, our determinism, and thus leave our science unscathed. It certainly has its allure. But what if we're not satisfied? I mean, someone at home might be saying, wait a second, so now you're telling me my actions and my desires are predetermined? How is this making anything better? And so for you, I'll offer one last position. There are two ways that worlds could fail to be deterministic. If the laws of nature in a given world were probabilistic, or if there are entities within a world that are not fully governed by the laws of nature, then even if those laws are themselves deterministic, that world would not be deterministic. So then which is it? I mean, what sort of universe are we all actually existing in? Well, no pony really knows. Your guess is as good as mine. Currently, science is actually pointing us in both directions. If we look at the way the universe behaves, quantum mechanics gives us fundamental, unavoidable indeterminacy, so that the alternative histories of the universe can be assigned probabilities. Sometimes the probabilities are very close to certainties, but they're never really certainties. Okay, so now I want to lay all my cards on the table. I'm going to tell you what I believe, understanding that I only believe it because I actually think it's true. Now, I may be completely wrong about everything, but at least I'll know I had offered you what I actually take to be the truth of things. The other reason I want to do this is to acknowledge my biases. I don't care who you are, we all have biases. So hopefully by equipping you with this information, you can sift through my words, spotting my biases, and even helping me overcome them. Okay, so remember how we said that magic is any event caused by forces beyond the laws of nature? Well, what are the laws of nature anyways? I mean, right now in metaphysics, there are two major competing theories. On one account, the regularity theory, laws of nature are statements of the uniformities or regularities in the world. They are mere descriptions of the way the world is. On the other account, the necessitarian theory, laws of nature are the principles which govern the natural phenomena of the world. That is, the natural world obeys the laws of nature. By and large, I think most of us think of the laws of nature in some sort of necessitarian way. We just think, yeah, the laws of nature are out there. We just need to discover what they are. But isn't this just an assumption that we bring to the table? You should watch PBS Idea Channel's video on mathematics for more on this dilemma. But what if we accepted the regularity theory? Well, I mean, science would still remain a means of understanding the way that things usually are. Things just need to be regular enough for us to study them. With this kind of concession made, I would say, yeah, there might be things in this universe that don't necessarily behave with these kinds of regularities. It would follow then that the universe is not an isolated system. I mean, each of us, you and I, are meddling coworkers adding to the system. It's also my persuasion that my conscious experience, in principle, is not available to the sciences, and therefore cannot be understood in the same strictly scientific way that gravity can. I mean, it may sound crazy, but go see for yourself. I mean, observe your own conscious experience for a while and tell me what you find. I mean, if we start by saying that magic is anything that can't be understood scientifically, then yeah, maybe I do think it's magic. On the other hand, if we accept the regularity theory, since humans are regularly part of the universe, in some sense, I'm within the laws of nature. Okay, look, there is a wealth of scholarship on every side of this, and there's no reason that you should take my word for any of it. And honestly, I think compatibilism takes the market right now, because it squares everything so nicely. As for me, I could never really get over the fact that I'd have to affirm that somehow my desires necessarily determine my actions. I just don't think that's quite right. I mean, for example, no matter how much I really want to finish the video, nevertheless,